Hi, this is Emma Sutherland. Join us on FX Medicine next week, where I'll be talking to Dr. Andrew Orr about his clinical experience with endometriosis. This is part of our series on endometriosis, where I interview a patient, a researcher, and a clinician to hear perspectives from all angles. Subscribe to us on your favourite podcast app and follow us on social media to make sure you never miss an episode. Hi, and welcome to FX Medicine, where we bring you the latest in evidence-based, integrative, functional and complementary medicine. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are recording today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. With us today is Professor Jon Wardle, who is Director of the National Centre for Naturopathic Medicine at Southern Cross University. In addition to clinical qualifications in nursing and naturopathic medicine, Jon has postgraduate qualifications in public health, law and health economics. With more than 200 academic publications to his name, Jon is a highly accomplished researcher. Today we're going to discuss his research into endometriosis. Welcome to FX Medicine, Jon. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know that you have a passion for endometriosis, and it was actually the focus of your clinical practice.
I do. Thanks for having me, Emma. It was certainly, pretty much what most of my practice was built around in Brisbane. And funnily enough, it came in many ways because of my experience as a nurse. So I went into naturopathy thinking that I would work in one certain area, and just all these stories of my colleagues in the it is a female dominated industry, nursing. I was one of the female nurses, and every time that hear that I was studying naturopathy, I'd be continually asked by friends and colleagues, is there anything you can do for endometriosis? I've been to this practitioner, no one can do anything, no one believes me, and it just really highlighted I guess how hidden, this condition is for many women, how much it's significantly impacting their lives, and, just the immense, need that was actually out there to work on. And as I, practiced more and more, it was just, it is a very rewarding practice to be in, because it is something that women, do experience a lot, 10% of Australian women, potentially, probably more, because it is quite a difficult thing to diagnose. And, you can make such a difference in people's lives by treating this condition that still to this day, women still go into a general practice clinic and can be told they're just making it up. And it's not all general practitioners, I should say. Some are very, very good, but it's 2022, and it should be a lot better than it is now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And endometriosis has been described as the largest women's health crisis of our time, and the need for significant research into endometriosis in the workplace has been highlighted with recent data showing that women with endometriosis, they don't feel fully supported in the workplace, and they, on average, need to take 4 sick days per month to manage their symptoms, and these are often unpaid. And that puts an extra financial burden on women who are already living with an expensive disease. Now, the Endo at Work project, it's a joint project between Endometriosis Australia and leading academics, including yourself, Jon. And the purpose is to examine the impact of endometriosis on an individual's career and how workplace changes may influence the management of endometriosis. So can you give us an overview of how this research is actually being conducted, the timeframes involved and the different stages? Can you walk us through if you can?
Yeah, sure. So, basically, what we're hoping to do is to, make workplaces a little bit more endometriosis friendly, make employers a little bit more endometriosis friendly, and actually make, really, find out how we can use the workplace itself as a tool for, making, life easier for women with endometriosis. And, as you said, it's a very expensive disease. Some of this might be employer management. A lot of women reported, not just, being passed over for promotion or actually being fired for their endometriosis, taking, what was viewed as excessive leave or whatnot for, what is a very valid reason for leave.
Yeah.
1 in 6 women, I think, actually reported they lost their jobs, and about 1 in 3, reported being passed over for promotion.
That's huge.
And, this can happen for, any number of reasons. Flare-ups aren't predictable. They happen when they happen. That might require being, having to sort of leave a face-to-face meeting at any time. It means that, a lot of women felt excluded from social and networking opportunities, that were actually intrinsic to, establish themselves in the office. And just the stigma of endometriosis still. It's if I, as a privileged white male, if I say I've got a migraine and I have to excuse myself from the meeting, that's well accepted. Women who reported, saying that they had a flare up, or often they didn't even feel confident or comfortable to discuss, why they have it. There's still a stigma around, women's health, in its impact on the workplace. So this project, and it's actually a series of a number of projects. So we're doing everything from, surveys of women to identify exactly, what is working, what isn't working, how we can make that better. We're talking to employers. We're working with the UK Endometriosis UK, who have initiated an endometriosis employer-friendly scheme.
Okay.
To basically identify how, this place where women spend, nearly a third of their lives, a place where, there is a lot of potential to actually, make life easier. There's, we saw with this natural experiment of COVID, working from home actually, improved symptom management in a lot of women. That's just simply because they could, they had access to, to health aides, during meetings. They could actually take time out and come back to a task. They actually had more flexible hours. Not every woman. It should be said that, obviously there are some types of jobs, office work, for example, that are more conducive to this. And we do need to work with other employers, and the construction industry is actually one that's doing quite well with this. They're looking at an extension of their campaign around menstruation to include endometriosis management. But there's a lot of things that we can actually do to make working life more flexible, and particularly more flexible for women with endometriosis. Because if we don't, we lose 10% of the female workforce, which is an extraordinarily valuable and important resource that Australian society needs to actually be working to their full potential.
Yeah. And, you can't underestimate what this research is going to bring to light, and how this ripple effect can flow through workplaces and have this much needed improvement for women. And it's such a taboo topic in many workplaces as well. That's what I hear from my patients, suffering from endometriosis, is that people feel almost afraid or nervous to bring it up. And there is that stigma that you mentioned. And we really just got to blow that out of the water. And I'm hoping that this research really helps to do that.
Yeah, and it's really about making, more employers actually, knowledgeable about what, they can actually achieve from this. Because our research initially showed that, 60% of women found that even just the small amount of flexibility that COVID created actually made them more productive. So increasing the option of women with endometriosis to be able to live up to their full potential, it benefits everyone. It benefits employers. It obviously benefits, the women with endometriosis themselves, and it benefits society as a whole. Yeah,
it's a win-win-win all around, absolutely. And, this project, it's government funded. Was it difficult to secure that funding?
Yeah, it's always difficult to secure funding from anyone, not just government. But, the thing that actually made this happen, well, obviously, just the incredible work of people like Mark Armour at Western Sydney Uni, people like Alex at Endometriosis Australia and Donald Chichia, and, a whole host of just incredible people continually advocating for this.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the government funding came from the place that most government funding comes from, and that's the narrative and the stories and the power of human interest and stories that around that. So, we were, really fortunate that there were some, wonderful women working in the backbench and the Senate actually, advocating for this. Some of them who were endo warriors, some who were not. Obviously, the Prime Minister's wife was quite influential in some of these discussions as well. But it's slowly sinking, into the community. Just the powerful stories of everyday impacts of this condition for women, and how how most women are actually being ignored in their health needs. So I think we're really that's where the National Action Plan for Endometriosis came from, because we've known this has been an underserved condition for a long time. And I just really want to acknowledge the work that particularly Endometriosis Australia have done on really highlighting how important this work is to do, and how important it is to pay more attention to this condition, because it's not gone away by ignoring it, and it's something that we can actually even some small changes from what we've seen can have actually quite a drastic effect.
Yeah, agreed. And that National Action Plan was launched in 2018, and they had $22 million worth of funding put towards that, which is incredible. And the overall goal was, a tangible improvement in the quality of life for individuals living with endometriosis, including a reduction in the impact and burden of disease at individual and population levels. And, one of the pillars is research. Are there any particular areas of research that you would love to see explored under this action plan?
Yeah, look, this workplace project is a really good example. I think there's a really great potential in empowering women to actually manage their condition, manage their endometriosis symptoms, better. We're asking people to. We're asking square pegs to fit into round holes.
Yeah.
I'd like to, make that hole that they need to fit in a little bit more square, a little bit, similarly shaped, because, we have, life doesn't go away.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of things we can actually do to make life easier for women, not just with endometriosis, but with any condition. And we don't really do that as well as we could in Australia. So,
agreed.
Lifestyle interventions, workplace interventions, creating, environments that are actually conducive to not just good health, but actually, empowering environments that actually enable you to manage whatever symptoms you have, and building that flexibility. This is a non-pharmacological approach. It's almost naturopathic by definition.
Yes.
And I think, sometimes naturopaths, we tend to focus on, the power of what happens over the desk with a one-on-one intervention with a patient. But actually, that holistic, notion of actually building health-producing environments, I think, is something that I think neither the research community or to be honest, many of the naturopathic community have actually paid as much attention as they should on.
Yeah. It's a really interesting area, and anything we can do to make this an easier process is going to be a great thing. And you mentioned before about how COVID has changed things, and doing some research for this episode, I came across this 2019 information sheet from Safe Work Australia, and it was detailing endometriosis and encouraging employers to consider flexible work arrangements and job modifications. And and it might have been a recommendation, but up until COVID happened, data is pretty clear that endometriosis sufferers didn't always have the flexibility that they needed. And one thing I've seen time and time again in clinical practice throughout COVID is how well it has suited these women. It's been just incredible. But yeah, can you expand on this a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Like you're right. This is something that's been recommended for a long, long time. And COVID, I guess snapped us all out of reality a bit and actually created a natural experiment. And COVID, obviously was a challenging time for all of us. But we really took this opportunity to actually highlight. This was the first time that people were being essentially forced to work from home. Employers didn't really have a choice on whether they could or not. Women were actually working from home, as were men in many jobs. And it's one of the few examples where basically the world provides you a natural experiment to test the hypothesis. And we won't waste that opportunity at all. And the results themselves, we knew it was probably going to be helpful, but the results were actually quite surprising to us. We were gobsmacked, to be honest, at how much this had actually improved the lives of women with endometriosis. So, nearly 80% of women, said it made management of their symptoms easier. Nearly 2/3 said, they were more productive. And, I think it was like 90%, of women actually, thought that flexibility in working arrangements was actually going to improve the management of workplace and the management of endometriosis in the workplace if there was actually a more formal way of doing that. So, it's one of those things. Sometimes you can say till you're blue in the face that, this is going to be helpful, but actually having this experience and having that data and actually being able to show to people, actually it helped women and it helped the bottom line. There's a lot of advantages here as well. So, through the Endo at Work project, that's the extension of what we're doing now, is to actually develop those recommendations for employers. Because I think working from home was always seen as a cost for employers, or it was going to result in lower productivity, or I don't know. People thought they were going to be, watching Netflix and, and eating tubs of ice cream, and that was all they were going to be doing while they're at work. But this was actually one of the few silver linings of the last 2 years was, we've had a radically different view of workplace flexibility and what workplaces, were doing that was good and what workplaces were doing that was bad. And I think there's a lot we can actually learn from that.
Yeah, and I think it's incredible. So that paper is called Endometriosis in the Workplace, Lessons from Australia's Response to COVID-19, and we'll link to that in the show notes for people that want to go on and read that in detail. But in our previous podcast that I did in this series on endometriosis with our endo warrior, Natasha, she explained to us the extensive nature of endometriosis and its high financial costs. And statistics show that endometriosis costs women an average of $30,000 a year. So the ability to work really matters to these women, and anything that can be done to make this an improved situation is so critical. And, Natasha was saying, it was so fascinating. She was saying, look, I was always the one person in a meeting that was on Zoom before COVID. And so I felt alone in that. And then in COVID, everybody was, joined me on Zoom, and then we were all kind of doing it together, and she really helped them work out some working from home techniques and strategies that had been working for her because she was the expert on the matter. So I think that there's a lot to be learned in this space.
Oh, completely. And look, some of the things that people found, most useful were just so simple for any workplace to develop. So just, things like being able to build the capacity for 20-minute rest periods. If people need to go away for 20 minutes. Something as simple as, actually, having heat packs available and the to heat them in the office, which isn't always available. Like, these are really low cost and very easy things to implement that don't actually disrupt the workplace at all. And actually, potentially make people's lives a lot easier and a lot more meaningful. So, and obviously, there are additional interventions, but there's a whole spectrum of, things that are actually, incredibly easy to implement and actually, more advanced things that actually, might take a little bit more infrastructure to do, but actually can be very useful and have a real cost and clinical benefit.
So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that most workplaces could action and implement that could make some quick changes while these longer-term things are being rolled out. I mean, I love that positivity there. Now, I want to sort of swing a little bit to the drivers of the pathogenesis of endometriosis. And I was looking at one study that showed the occurrence was around 6.9% in first-degree relatives of women with the disease compared to a 1% rate in relatives of controls. And I found this really fascinating because as a naturopath, we know this is a multidimensional situation. There are many drivers, but this that stat to me was such a highlighting one that showed me, okay, don't ever forget the importance of the case taking, of course. But what other drivers, what are the drivers that you see and that you feel are involved? And I know there's many, but let's just delve into this a little.
Yeah, look, well, you're completely right. It's a multidimensional, multifaceted condition for sure. And actually, I remember having this conversation with with people who were dubious about, many naturopathic treatments or many complementary medicine treatments because they'd say, oh, well, the trials say it doesn't work or,
Yeah.
something like that. But, when when you're a naturopath, you do your case taking, you know that some people, your treatment might be related to sort of, microbiome, it might be related to the inflammatory component, it might be hormonal, it might be, there are any things that can actually come into play with that treatment. And if you're picking out just one and giving that same treatment to everyone with endometriosis, by its very definition, you're gonna be successful in the minority of cases. So, and this is one of the things that I find so interesting about endometriosis is it is so multidimensional. It is highly individualized. Women are experiencing the same symptoms and the same manifestations in many cases, but the journey of how that developed can be quite different, radically different for many women. So I know the familial aspect as well. Certainly there is a genetic aspect to endometriosis itself, and that can be something that does form, with a very high genetic component. But all these risk factors themselves can actually, they've got quite a, there's quite a high relationship of sort of familial tendencies, in things like, how, autoimmunity, for example, or, we're seeing a lot of really interesting stories about, the microbiome of your grandparents is very similar to the microbiome of yourself. And there are certain things you have to do to actually, negate the bad habits of your ancestors in some cases. So, because that does actually get passed down generation to generation. So, I do think it is something that we need to look at, a lot more carefully. I think we need to look at it beyond just genetics, because historically, in these sorts of papers, it's been about the genetic pathogenesis, and I think it's actually more, it's actually more related to those risk factors and those sort of, those behaviours, the diet, lifestyle behaviours that that might have been 3 or 4 generations ago, but are actually still impacting, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren down the track.
Yeah.
So when you are doing your case taking, you are right. No blood test or or anything can actually replace the good case taking technique. But I think it is actually increasingly important to actually look, not just at the individual themselves, but also, the environment they've come from, the family they've come from, the risks that might have actually filtered down through the generations there as well.
Yeah, that is such a good point. From that naturopathic perspective, we're always blaming estrogen on things, but I think in this case, it's not the only thing at play. The inflammation process, interferons playing with that inflammatory pathways, and I mean, there's so many things at play here. And sometimes I think of a spider's web as a clinician, and if we just start to tug on one of the strands of the spider web, move towards an anti-inflammatory diet, or, encourage the sleep hygiene to be better, we can start having an effect across the whole body system. But yeah, I think addressing the underlying drivers are always going to be key here.
Oh, completely. And, we need to treat everyone with endometriosis with an open mind, because you're right, historically, it's always been about the hormones, and, the hormones can be impacted by, the HPO axis or the HPA axis. It can be influenced by the microbiome. It can be influenced by, just stress and anxiety more generally. It can be influenced by diet. There's all sorts of factors that can come into that. So, I think we need to, every patient that comes through your door with endometriosis is a new patient, and they might have endometriosis, but you can't assume that anything that they actually have influencing their endometriosis diagnosis is the same as the last patient with endometriosis you saw. And for me as a clinician, that was actually what I found even more rewarding about treatment was that these were people who would often go to a lot of other practitioners with
Yeah.
essentially shotgun or protocol type treatments for endometriosis weren't getting success. And it wasn't just the, I guess the detective work of trying to find out what was happening, physiologically or sometimes not always physiologically, but, sometimes psychologically or, all these things are impacting. But, it was often the first time that these women had actually had someone actually treating them and their condition as an individual,
Yeah.
rather than actually treating them as endometriosis. So, it lends itself to naturopathic treatment so well for that. And I think, it's something that naturopaths should be, very, certainly make sure we don't let go down the route of, evidence-based treatments.
Yeah,
We
true.
certainly shouldn't be doing the protocol type treatments. But, I remember when I was first practicing and just even the concept that, gut health could actually impact, women with endometriosis. So,
Yeah.
giving them, modifying the microbiome, which wasn't even called then. We're talking about, I think it was, it was leaky gut, and it was,
Yeah, that's right.
we were a little bit more simplistic and floral in our language then. But, I remember being, laughed at and sort of, castigated and, all sorts of things by other practitioners and that. And now, the research around microbiome and endometriosis is, it's pretty standard now. Like, it's a pretty standard thing to actually say that actually that is something you should look at when you are treating a woman with endometriosis. And that's something that, you'll hear, probably from a GP or a gynecologist.
Yeah. And look, I think
without much controversy.
Yeah, this aspect of whole body medicine is really growing, and it's so great to see that philosophy, moving out to other forms of healthcare. But, as a clinician, one of my dreams is to see an accurate blood marker for endometriosis to be discovered. And, in clinic, we see this incredible suffering as women as they walk the years-long path to diagnosis. But laparoscopies, they can be invasive, they can be expensive. And, a deep endometriosis ultrasound, it can be helpful, but it's more predictive of severe endometriosis, not the mild or moderate. And in the research for this episode, I came across a paper from April this year that looked at 29 studies on potential biomarkers, but unfortunately they concluded that none had reached, diagnostic utility. And my feeling is that there's going to be a combination of biomarkers that might just one day become diagnostic. But I would love to know, do you have any insights on that front?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you and say that they probably know a lot more than I do about this. But look, you're completely right, Emma. It's laparoscopies are very invasive and expensive, and ultrasounds, actually, they are a lot better, but they're still not great.
Yeah.
For no other reason than you actually have to go to a specified, facility and that kind of stuff. And they're one of the things that often doesn't get discussed about diagnosing endometriosis this way is it just also allows people to dismiss, women when they say they've got endometriosis from being believed. So, a lot of women's, complaints get dismissed because, they might not be able to take the time out and
Yeah.
have one of these things. They might, for pretty justifiable reasons, might not want to go. I used to be a theatre nurse back in the day.
Okay.
Any operating theatre is not a pleasant environment that you'd sort of put your hand up and want to go to willingly. So,
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned research is just so important, and it's 2022 and we're still reliant on an invasive surgical technique to actually fully diagnose women with endometriosis, and I think that speaks to just the I guess the incorrect priorities in where we're placing our research dollars, because there are biomarkers for for anything that ever happens to the prostate.
Yes.
And look, there might be physiological reasons for that, but a big part of that is actually because that's a male condition. Like if women if endometriosis affected men as much as it affected women, we'd definitely have biomarkers by now.
Oh my goodness. Don't get me started, Jon. Like, don't get me started, because I cannot tell you how many times I've literally wrung my hands and said, why do we not have this clinical information yet? It's so frustrating as a clinician to see and hear these stories. But one of the key areas of interest for me is the use of cannabis for endometriosis, because, in clinic, many of my patients are using it for really effective pain relief, but it would be just incredible to see some research in this space. And a 2021 paper by Justin Sinclair and Jerome Saris showed pain was the most common reason used cannabis. Now, we know this clinically, but it's great to see this backed up in the research. But do you have any research coming up that involves cannabis? Because I'd be very interested.
We have actually quite a lot of research in cannabis. Actually, we're running Australia's 2 largest clinical trials in cannabis through the centre right now. None of them in endometriosis, I should say. Although, pelvic pain is I think one of the, the real key areas of benefit for cannabis. And, cannabis is something that can be a little bit overhyped sometimes. There's probably, this large circle of stuff that, it's claimed for benefit in, and a smaller circle within that it is actually useful. But one of the, the things that I find really, fascinating about cannabis is that it doesn't treat all pain equally.
Yeah.
There are some forms of pain it just isn't effective in, and there are some forms of pain it's really effective in, and the one that it seems to be really great for is pelvic pain.
Perfect.
And certainly, we've had discussions with the local health district here. So obviously we're based in Lismore. We're sort of in the Rainbow region. I just bought a place in Nimbin. Living up to every stereotype. But every woman with pelvic pain in the region attending the clinics in the Lismore-based hospital is using cannabis. And some of this is made in some guy's bathtub, but it is helping them. And there seems to be a real appetite to actually explore how this is. So we are having some conversations around that at the moment. We don't have anything going in that at the moment, but we've got a project with cannabis and fibromyalgia, one of the other forms of pain that seems to be quite helpful for. We've been working with veterans and a few other things. Obviously, there's some work in cancer that Janet Schloss, I think you've had on your program already, is working on. So we do have quite a big cannabis program, and I just can't wait to sort of get these 2 programs working together.
Yeah,
my own personal interest in endometriosis and cannabis, because I think there's just enormous potential there.
Oh, we'll have to get you back on the show when the research comes out, because that's going to be fantastic. And before, when we were talking about that holistic nature of treatment, I know Deakin University is currently recruiting for a trial to assess the effect of either yoga, cognitive behavioural therapy, or education on quality of life with women with endometriosis. And previous studies have definitely shown the benefits of yoga. What do you envision for the woman of the future as an ideal treatment for her endometriosis? What do you see in 10 years' time for it to be available?
Yeah, well, this goes back to that research priority that I was talking to you before, empowering, women to actually be, leads, actually not just reliant on practitioners, but leads in their own journey to good health. So, yoga is just a fantastic tool to do. One of the things that I actually use, quite effectively in clinical practice, but has no research on it at all, is hydrotherapy. And this is everyone has the equipment already in their house. Water is free, well, not free, but very, very low cost. And it's something that you can actually do, by yourself without supervision. So certainly, we've reintroduced hydrotherapy into our naturopathic program because of that, because that is such a wonderfully accessible and effective non-pharmacological approach. But obviously education programs I think are really important. So we've got some great students that are doing some fantastic work in the area of lifestyle medicine and group visits, which, are primarily not just treatment programs, but education programs. And, I remember, I think every practitioner is the same. I used to, I shudder to think of how many trees I sent to their doom, with almost scribbles of diagrams that I would draw for patients, sort of, educating them about their body and sort of, and doing that. So I think, I would really like to see more patient, not just centered, but patient-led. I really think, there's a real great role for naturopaths, not just as sort of, practitioners that sort of sit over the other side of the desk, but actually facilitators to help people through these lives. Yoga. I found it just the other day. I've moved offices, and I found my old yoga book from 1974 that I used to photocopy and give to every patient. Not just that I would do, but one of the things that I think will be really interesting. You mentioned yoga. Is there are individualized forms of yoga, and we've just developed an MOU with SVIASA University, one of the largest yoga universities in India, and a couple of naturopathic and yoga hospitals over there. They're doing wonderful, basically, these sorts of programs, but they're doing individualized yoga for conditions, condition-specific yoga programs, and endometriosis is one of the ones that we're working with them on moving forward. So, but, I think, we always talk about lifestyle medicine and that kind of stuff, and it can be a bit of a, I guess, dumping ground for just let the patient sort it out. It can be a bit victim blaming, as well. So you can be, we say, well, if only you were living the right, lifestyle and doing the right behaviours, you'd be better. I think there's a real opportunity to have a much more sophisticated and nuanced approach to, how we, help people help themselves with the management of their conditions and symptoms. So
and that collaborative care model that as clinicians that we need to always keep front of mind is, who is the best person for me to refer to in, the yoga space, in the, sleep space, like whatever it is, we need to wrap these patients in a fantastic support network so that they have what they need at their fingertips rather than trying to struggle on their own. I think that, that's super important. But let's talk about one of my passions, which is food as medicine in clinical practice. And I know the Center for Integrative Nutrition at the Uni of California are currently recruiting for a 3-month study on the effect of plant-based diet on endometriosis. Do you know of any current research in this space?
Well, that's pretty much it at the moment. Gordon Sachs and his group at UC San Diego on that, which is a plant-based diet, but also it's actually a Chinese medicine oriented plant-based diet as well. So there are a lot of TCM principles in that. I think there's enormous scope to doing that. We're certainly developing, what's called a culinary medicine component to our to our degree here. We've got infrastructure that's actually is going to be very much tooled to do that sort of similar work. And the thing that always sticks with me about this whole food as medicine concept is I remember going to a research conference and seeing a colleague from the UK talking about how disappointed they were in their Chinese medicine trial because, they had this Chinese medicine trial, they designed it perfectly, and, it worked really, really well, but so did placebo. And then when we asked them about placebo, we asked them what the placebo was, and they said, we designed it really well. We wanted to make sure, the placebo was equally as disgusting to take, equally as smelly, equally as... and then and they called it the Tesco placebo. And when I asked them what it was, they said, we just put lots of, garlic and sort of cabbage and sort of Brussels sprouts. And I said, well, that no wonder it worked so well. It sounds remarkably like a, naturopathic food as medicine treatment for someone with endometriosis. So, so look, I think there's just, so much, that we can be doing in the food as medicine space because it is the medicine you take every day. And, it might not be as powerful as pharmaceuticals, but what it makes up in just being able to, completely, reorient the body's physiology. It makes up for just its constant presence. So, and I think anyone who's, I used to always, relay to my students that if if your patient walks away and you've made no other change then for the rest of their life, they're just eating one more vegetable or just a few more legumes or something like that, then you've actually made an extraordinary difference in their life. And we know from nutritional studies that these things can make a lot of difference to the symptoms and symptom management of endometriosis. And I'd love to bring this back to food because a lot of them are lentils and microbiome, or the sort of cruciferous, the cruciferous foods rather than supplements, or
Yeah.
even simple things like just restoring the sort of fatty acid balance can actually make a big difference in that inflammatory response as well. So I think there's just an enormous potential.
Yeah.
And we do have one student that's sort of starting on this, but that's as part of a bigger group program.
Okay.
But it is one of the things that seems to be just working really, really well.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, I think for all the clinicians listening, don't ever forget the food as medicine is your baseline. Don't go getting fancy and throwing supplements and all sorts of other things if you have not covered that food as medicine baseline. I'm so passionate about that. Now, one of your PhD students is doing quite a lot of them are doing some good work, but the one that really, really fascinates me is the one by Sophia Gerontakis, who's doing a clinical trial to investigate how accessibility to naturopathic care can be improved. And her studies focused on examining the effectiveness of group-delivered naturopathic care. And I really feel this is groundbreaking research and can't wait for these outcomes to be published. And Dr. Michelle Woolhouse did an episode with James Maskell on community-based care, and the early data from his work is really so incredibly positive. I can see this model working so well with endometriosis. So when will these results be released? I'm very keen to hear them.
Yeah, well, you'd be very happy to hear that Sophia is very close to finishing data collection now.
Great.
So hopefully very soon. But just the initial feedback has been fantastic, and it's everything you'd expect from a group intervention. So, one of the one of the key tenets of naturopathic medicine is the whole doctor as teacher phenomenon, and then group interventions are basically they just take that principle and just run with it. So. It's women are learning about themselves and about their conditions. It's not just, they're not relying on the practitioner themselves to actually learn from. They're actually learning from each other. They're actually making, there's a lot of, opportunities, affording, reflection on their own experiences. For many people, it's probably it's one of the first times they've had the luxury, I guess, of sitting in that sort of supportive and facilitated environment to sort of walk through their own experiences. So, within that, obviously, so, group interventions, basically how they work, it's generally a sort of a program of care, 6-week, 12-week, 24-week, depending on the condition and whatever you have, of regular meetings, education sessions on things like food as medicine.
Great.
Like mindfulness, like self-care, those sorts of things. And then, also the opportunity to have sort of individualized brief consultations if there is something more specific that the women want to talk to. So, group medical interventions are, what they've previously been called are or shared medical appointments.
Yes.
I like to call them group visits because I think, naturopaths have a very unique and a very, well poised to sort of, work in this kind of space. And I think it's something that does make naturopathy more accessible to many people. Some people aren't ready for that one-on-one consult.
Yeah, and it's too expensive, Jon. For a lot of people, it's cost prohibitive. And I love that this is just so much more inclusive on so many levels. So I'm really looking forward to getting all the details from that one. Now, my last question for you.
Well, and one of the things, Emma, too, that's really, I think, exciting about this. So I was just talking to someone. I won't name names, but a very large veterans clinic, which is actually using a similar approach for veteran care and pain, and what they've been able to do by through it being a program rather than a naturopathic visit, they've actually managed to get the major private health insurer to actually pay for naturopathic treatment.
Incredible,
even in the light of the bans for this. So, I think there's obviously our centre are very actively trying to sort of repeal that prohibition, which is, it's a very unfair prohibition. But this might also be a way that we can actually get that accessibility barrier overcome as well.
Yeah, and I love all the advocacy work that you're doing at the centre. It's much needed in our industry, so a big thank you. My last question in the last minute or two is, as a researcher, I know you're eternally curious, and I would love to know if you could design a study without any barriers to resources, what would you want to research in this space? What question do you want answered?
Well, hopefully I'm working towards them.
Okay, great.
Slowly, a little bit delayed. So, as I told you, I started working in clinical practice in this, in this setting, and sort of, went off into the research community and kind of had to let endometriosis not go, but, didn't get to focus on as much as I wanted. And now I get to make a few more decisions. So I'm really trying to reorient, back to my passion, which is this. But my passion always has been the same, is that accessibility, that affordability, getting the power of naturopathic treatments to those who need them the most. And sometimes that's the really low intervention stuff that no one has an interest in funding.
Yeah.
Hydrotherapy is one example we've chosen, but even food as medicine, no one makes money out of food as medicine projects at all. But, one of my lecturers when I was, when I was studying, made the comment that, as, the more years that they practice, the less and less products that they they prescribed. And, the ones that they did prescribe were really targeted and very, very necessary. But when they first started, they're just giving people everything. People were rattling around out of their clinics. But
I know it is a big no. But I think as you learn more, you realise how to practice in a way that's much more efficient for the patient as well.
But really learning from those naturopathic principles, and we've got other PhD students like Rebecca Redmond as well, who's doing great work going back, through not just the naturopathic archive, as it were, but hundreds of years of historical documents. Some of these things we shouldn't learn from. Some are, some of these, and they were always men, who were writing books then were, of their time, and the same sort of I'll just get pregnant and that will fix it kind of mentality often was there. But there are some, really interesting, I guess, traditional approaches that were really useful. I know that one of my one of the treatments that I used a lot in my practice was pariah cocos, which is a Chinese medicine herb which is used for damp heat usually, and I found that quite effective in many women. But there's not been a lot of that kind of what can we learn from traditions, and can we take the best of, bits of Chinese medicine and incorporate them in naturopathic ways, or bits of other, naturopathic medicine and incorporate them in Ayurvedic treatments, or, yoga. So trying to, I think, as you said, that lifestyle, building, empowering women to actually have more control in producing good health themselves, rather than sort of having to go back to a pharmacy or a practitioner every second week to get their fix. So
amazing.
So much potential.
Yeah, there is so much potential, which is so exciting, and I just can't wait to see this research path unfold for you. But thank you so much for joining us today, Jon. Like the key points, there's so many key points, but the future looks bright, ranging from better access to naturopathic care to blood-based biomarkers for a quicker diagnosis and more inclusive workplaces. There is so much for us to look forward to in this space. Thank you everyone for listening today. Don't forget, you can find all the show notes, transcripts and other resources from today's episode on the FX Medicine website. I'm Emma Sutherland, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. This podcast is intended as healthcare practitioner education only, and it is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to FX Medicine, and share us with your family, friends, and colleagues.